Next, let's talk about the height of a handgun. The height of a handgun is the measurement from the bottom of the handle, or the bottom of the magazine that protrudes out of the handle, up to the top of the slide. So we consider the height of a handgun one of its most important characteristics to evaluate in terms of its effectiveness for many reasons. And as we discuss these reasons, you're going to start seeing more and more vividly why every one of these characteristics with handgun selection is not a yes or a no, or that it's not a correct and incorrect answer. Instead, they're all a series of unfortunate compromises. What do I mean by that? Well, what's the job of a handgun? What's a handgun's role? It's to send projectiles downrange as fast and as accurately as possible in a range or in a manner that is as safe as possible for the user and as dangerous as possible for the target. That's all a handgun's job is. And so if that's the criteria that we have to work with, if we asked ourselves, well, what's the best tool for that job? Well, it's certainly not one of these. The best tool for that job would be a pump shotgun or a semi-automatic AR-15. Those are the tools that are going to be best able to send projectiles downrange as accurately and quickly as possible. So the obvious problem here is what? We can't carry an AR-15 around with us or a pump shotgun. Even if it was legal everywhere and even if it wouldn't arouse the suspicion and the alarm of our neighbors, it's just not practical. We wouldn't do it. We don't live in a war zone. We just live in a country where we have a slightly elevated chance of being attacked. And so what we want to do, obviously, is have a tool on us that we can more or less forget about because it's relatively comfortable, and have that tool be able to perform the job needed to be done as well as possible. And so, given that criteria, a handgun is a series of compromises. It's a series of trade-offs. And so now let's dive into some of the reasons why the height of a handgun is a very good example of some of these compromises that we're just going to have to make. When evaluating a handgun's height, we're balancing higher concealability at one end of the spectrum with recoil compensation, recoil absorption, control, speed, and ammunition capacity at the other end. And so let's discuss each one of these traits, and let's talk about how the handgun's height affects each one of them. The simple fact of the matter is that the taller a handgun is, the more difficult it's going to be to carry concealed. That's just the way it is. Why is that? Because with most holsters and most carry positions, the most common orientation of a concealed handgun is to be pointed vertically. It's pointing down. You can see this is an unloaded gun. It's got an unloaded chamber. And so most guns are going to be carried in that orientation. Well, what happens when we do that? For example, I carry at the inside the waistband position just like this with my clothing pulled over the handgun. Well, the longer the handgun gets, the more this handle, or the taller the handgun gets, I should say, the more the handle is going to protrude out into my clothing. And so the natural knee-jerk reaction then is that we should get the shortest handguns possible, the ones with the shortest handles. And this one's also unloaded. True to form, if we put a short handgun in, then there is almost no protrusion. I could wear even just a white t-shirt over this handgun, and no matter how my body is, you're going to have a hard time ever seeing that handgun protrude. So that's the knee-jerk reaction that most people have. Well, I'll get the easiest gun to conceal. That's going to be the one with the shortest handle. However, as we go into all the cons of a short handle, or as I'll describe them, the pros of a longer handle, you'll see that this decision is nowhere near that simple. Now, perhaps the biggest pro of a longer handle is that because the ammunition for a handgun is stored in the handle, the longer the handle is, typically the more ammunition that handgun is going to be able to hold. Take a look at these two extreme examples, the Glock 17 and the Glock 26. Both of these fire the 9x19 millimeter cartridge, the 9 millimeter Luger. They're both the exact same width. They have the same exact trigger guards, meaning basically all the holsters that work for the Glock 26 or the Glock 17 will work for each other. Not all of them, but most of them. They're the same handgun, except the Glock 17 is longer, it's longer and it's taller than the Glock 26. Well, because of that, the magazines which slide into the handles are also different lengths. And because they're different lengths, that means they have different ammunition capacities. So the Glock 17 holds 17 rounds, coincidentally. It's a Model 17, it's just a coincidence, but it holds 17 rounds in the magazine. Compare that to the magazine of the Glock 26. It only holds 10 rounds. And so when you look at the Glock 17, obviously this gun is going to be too big for most people to carry concealed, but with this weapon, you've got almost double the ammunition capacity. You've got 17 rounds for the Glock 26's 10. And so it becomes very clear that we don't always want to go with the shortest handgun because we're severely limiting that weapon's effectiveness in a self-defense situation. Why? Well, we're going to talk about ammunition capacity more in a following chapter, but as you'll see, survival in a self-defense situation often comes down to how many rounds you can fire at your target. And when you have 7 more rounds in this length of a handle, suddenly we realize we should probably start trying to carry a gun with as long of a handle as possible, provided we can still conceal it. Now, like I said, we're going to go into all of this in more detail here in just a couple chapters when we talk about ammunition capacity. But just so you know, the importance of ammunition capacity cannot be overstated. And there's 2 big reasons why a greater ammunition capacity is going to increase your survival rate through a violent situation. And after all, that really is the only point to even carrying a concealed handgun, right? I mean, if we run out of ammunition, if the gun runs dry and there's still somebody trying to kill us, then whether we're keeping that gun for home defense or we're carrying it concealed, we really just wasted a whole lot of our time. And so if there's one thing that we don't want to sacrifice on, in addition to quality and the other things that we've been talking about, it is our ammunition capacity. So I mentioned there's 2 reasons why we need to really consider ammunition capacity in a very important way. The first reason is because of the physical aspects of surviving a violent encounter. Simply put, statistics show that most shots fired in a self-defense situation are going to miss. They just will. That's recorded hit and miss ratios from trained and qualified police officers. Anywhere from 56% at ultra close range, I'm talking literally about 1 yard, up to 77% up to 21 feet or 7 yards. 77% of your shots can miss your target. You can almost just plan on that. And so if your handgun is a very short handgun and it only holds 10 rounds, then what does that mean for you? Well, if you're like most trained police officers, then only 2 to 3 of those rounds, when you fire that whole magazine at one attacker, will actually hit him. Well, what if you're being attacked by 2 people? You see what I mean? Again, we're going to talk about this more in just a moment, so I'm going to leave it at that. But the other important thing we have to consider here is the psychological aspect. This is something that we cover in far greater detail in the Armed American's Complete Concealed Carry Guide to Effective Self-Defense. That's really our flagship publication here at Concealed Carry University. But we go into the psychological role of surviving a violent attack, or I should say the role of psychology when it comes to survival. And essentially, the more times you can expose your threat to loud and violent resistance to his attempt to kill you, the greater the chance is that your attacker is going to decide to run. So if before he even becomes aware that you're shooting at him, you've run out of ammunition because your gun only holds 5 rounds, for example, then he's going to recover very quickly from that and keep trying to kill you. Even if you placed a couple hits on him, he's going to have 30 to 45 seconds, even with good shots. And so if you can overpower him with firepower, you can cause him to psychologically disengage long before the physical trauma of your bullets would have caused him to physically disengage. Now, I am greatly simplifying an entire field of study here, but suffice it to say, if you're ever going to sacrifice one thing, I mean, at least in the top 5 things we should not sacrifice when we're looking at selecting a conceal or a handgun for home defense or concealed carry, it shouldn't be ammunition capacity. We should try to carry a gun with as great of an ammunition capacity as possible while still ensuring that that handgun remains concealable on our person. After ammunition capacity, stability and control are going to be your 2 greatest advantages when we're talking about a longer handle. Simply put, the more skin-to-gun contact that you can make with your handgun, the more control you're going to have over that handgun when firing. Does that make sense? The more skin you have touching the handgun, the more control you're going to have when you're shooting that handgun. And that control is going to come in the form of stability throughout your trigger press as you seek to hold the gun steady while pulling on its trigger, which, I should remind you, often weighs a lot more than the actual weight of the gun, right? The force required to pull the trigger, that's more poundage than the actual weight of the gun. And so stability during the trigger press is very important. Well, again, the longer the handle, the more stability during the trigger press you're going to have. But also, you're going to have more stability during and in between shots. You see, since your gun is going to recoil in your hand, you can't accurately fire another shot until that gun is stabilized and leveled back out in front of you. You've got to wait for the muzzle to become level again. And I'm telling you, the less skin-to-gun contact you have on that gun, the more freedom that gun is going to have to jump in your hands, and the longer, therefore, it's going to take for you to regain control of the handgun, restore your view of your sights on your target, and start to make another shot. And so you can see, the longer the handgun's handle gets, the more control you have on that gun. That said, the biggest jump in control is going to come when you opt for a gun with a full-sized handle or a compact handle rather than a subcompact handle. So what do I mean? Well, we've got to look at the 3 basic sizes of handguns again. We've got full-size handguns, we've got compact handguns, and then we have subcompact handguns. Now, both full-size and compact handguns allow you to get all 3 of your fingers wrapped around the handle. Here's a full-size handgun. Here's a compact handgun. Again, we've got all 3 fingers on the handle. A subcompact handle only allows 2, and you've got a pinky down here in no man's land. And what did we just say? The more skin-to-gun contact you have, the more stability you're going to have. And so what's the difference here between the compact and the full size? It has to do with the back strap. Take note, with the compact, I've got some skin pouring over the bottom of the handle. Well, what this is inefficiency. It's wasted skin-to-gun contact. You can still shoot this handgun far more accurately than you can this one because you have a lot more skin-to-gun contact on this one than you do this one. But on a full size, there's no wasted skin-to-gun contact. The handle is being contacted by as much of your skin as possible. And so that is a big compromise we have to make when talking about the handgun height. Is the longer it gets, the more control we have, and the shorter it gets, the less control we have, until that control takes a big drop off when we go from compact to subcompact. Now, one way to mitigate that is to add a magazine with a pinky extension. This lets us regain a lot of this lost skin-to-gun contact. Now, there's still a lot more skin-to-gun contact lost with a subcompact with a pinky extension than a compact pistol just by default. However, you will notice a substantial increase in your ability to control this handgun during firing when it has a pinky extension on it versus when it doesn't. So again, we see the compromises illustrated very vividly between a longer handle and a shorter handle. And finally, another big pro of having a longer handle is that that gun is far more comfortable and enjoyable to fire. You see, when a handgun's handle takes up less surface area on our hand, it's the same amount of force, because these all fire the same cartridge, so it's the same amount of force being spread across a smaller and smaller area of our hand. And therefore, it's going to feel a lot rougher on that part of our hand that it's contacting, especially if we're talking about firing a subcompact without a magazine extension, because now we've got an increased pressure point right here where it's going to be trying to pivot in our hands. And you'll find that if you fire a subcompact handgun with no pinky extension, or even with it, that's the part of your hand that gets the sorest. And this is purely anecdotal, but I'll just throw out there, based on my own experience, I would say that firing a subcompact handgun with a pinky extension is 15 to 20% more comfortable than firing it without it. And then firing a compact handgun is 10% more comfortable than firing a subcompact with a pinky extension. And then a full-size handgun, firing this is at least 10% more comfortable than firing a compact handgun. And again, that all has to do with the more skin-to-gun contact you have, allowing that recoil to be dispersed through more of your hand. At the end of the day, remember that the longer a handgun's handle is, the more ammunition that gun will hold, the faster and more accurate you'll be able to be with that gun in firing, and the more comfortable it will be to fire. However, these pros come with a disadvantage, because the longer that handle is, the greater the challenge you'll have to conceal it beneath your clothing. And this is the compromise that we make as armed citizens when we're selecting a handgun based on handgun height, or expressed another way, handle length.